Hello, everyone, and happy Monday. Welcome to A Conversation With, our series at Sounding Boards with inspiring learning leaders. So today we have a special treat. I have my co-founder on the show today, Lori Mazan, and she is not only my co-founder, she's the president and chief coaching officer at Sounding Board. And we have a very special episode for you today because Lori is launching her book, A Leadership Revolution, The Future of Developing Dynamic Leaders. And so today we get an opportunity to hear a little bit more about the book, some of the really interesting themes and insights from the book directly from Lori herself. So Lori, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Christine. Looking forward to it.
So Lori, you have been a coach for over 25 years, one of the first of 300 even certified in the profession. And we actually met when you coached me at my last startup. And usually with this show, we love to start with this question of your origin story. But I thought because we are focusing on the book and your experience as a coach, that we could talk a little bit about our origin story, where you and I met each other and how that led to starting Sounding Board and some of the themes that are related to the book. And so do you want to start off and give us a little flavor of that? And I can certainly add my own anecdote.
Well, gosh, you're going to probably have to say the dates now, but back in the day, I was coaching a CEO at Christine's previous company. And he requested that I actually coach Christine. She was an up-and-coming leader and responsible for a lot of the success of the company. And normally I don't coach the CEO. I am someone who reports to the coach, but in this case, he basically begged me to do it. And so we got some agreements in place and I started coaching Christine. Fast forward a number of years and Christine reached out and said a version of coaching's the best leader development I've experienced, really professional development, and I want to bring it to a lot more leaders and organizations. And I had been coaching almost exclusively execs and CEOs, and they constantly told me, like, I wish I had this earlier in my career. So that really was the inception of Sounding Board, like finding a way to bring the benefits of executive coaching to all leaders in our organization and doing that earlier so that their leadership development trajectories accelerated.
And my piece of the story, or my side of the story, was really that I found after working with Lori, I wanted to bring her everywhere I went, to every subsequent company, because I was constantly facing new challenges and changes and transitions as a leader. And coaching really felt like the one modality that could really help me in a personalized way that was able to adapt to, this type of company, new CEOs, new transitions, new functions, in a way that's standard management training or books that I had been reading just couldn't cut it. And I think that's a great transition for us to talk a little bit about the book and how that came to be, because you have this idea that there is no one size fits all in leadership. And so tell us a little bit more about what that means. I certainly experienced it firsthand, but I'd love for you to help other people understand what that means.
Yeah, sure. So one reason coaching is so valuable as a development approach is it's personalized to the individual, and primarily because it's contextual. So what works in one environment doesn't necessarily work in a different environment. Like people who have changed companies and experienced a very different culture, they find out like, oh, I was so successful in this one style culture, and now I'm at a different company and it's totally different, and I don't know how to be successful here. So coaching is just really great for helping leaders adapt to whatever their current context is. And that could be a different company, but it also can be the change that we've all been experiencing that's also been accelerated, where, suddenly you're in a pandemic. Now, what do you do? Suddenly you're all remote. Now, what do you do? Suddenly you're hybrid. Now, what do you do? Suddenly the economy is like going off the rails. Now, what do you do? Like every larger event is impacting individuals as a leader, and they all require different styles and approaches to leadership. So that's really what dynamic leadership is about, being able to adapt to any circumstance that comes your way and apply the right skills and capabilities at the right time, in the right context, in your own style and approach to leadership.
Yeah, and I don't know, is it just me, or does it feel like these changes are happening faster, more frequently?
Yeah.
Somehow on a bigger scale than ever before.
Yes. Actually, I showed a chart in the last webinar I did that, the line of change is up and to the right, and it is actually global. So if you're up to date with things, things are hitting the fan all around the planet, and it doesn't seem like it's easing up at all. So that means, as leaders, we have to try to adapt to that.
Yeah. Well, can you go one level deeper, Lori, for folks? Because I think we hear this idea of being more adaptable. And certainly we talk a lot about this idea of dynamic development at Sounding Board. But for someone who's, working in a startup or an executive at a large company that's going through a big transformation, can you give some insight into how they become more adaptable, or what that means to be more dynamic, and how coaching can help them? I'll say one more thing, which is the book, which I thought was really interesting, follows the arc of a coaching engagement. So it really is going to be your inside track and, secret peek around how that happens. But give folks here a taste that haven't had to read the book yet.
Okay, good. Yeah, the book is a little bit of inside baseball, actually, because even though it has broad ideas, it's positioned as, a 12-session coaching engagement, and trying to give folks an idea what happens in each of those sessions. So I would say, in terms of how leadership is changing, one is, the environment's just way less predictable than it was in the last century. It's much more diverse. The things that are coming down the pike are things we've never seen before. So the first thing that has to happen is the leader's mindset needs to shift. And it's no longer this idea of, oh, I know how to be a leader, right? Because how to be a leader like pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, that can be two very different things. So yes, you have a set of capabilities and skills, but now the goal is how do you apply them helpfully, successfully in a whole bunch of different environments that you may not have ever anticipated. And one of the stark differences, like when I started my career a lot more years ago than we probably need to name, companies had a 30-year plan, Now we don't even know what's happening next month. Is there going to be an interest increase? Is there not? I mean, we have no idea. We're just taking all this information as it comes at us, and having to have the capacity to respond to all those things and not get knocked off our feet, or not get knocked off our confidence, or not get knocked off our ability to respond uniquely to unique situations. And it's that basic thing, like, what you did before, sure, that was great, but it may not help you at all now because the environment has changed so much. That's no longer going to work. So that idea of just constantly changing, growing, iterating, even Sounding Board has a value. We named it continuous evolution, or continuously evolving, because to really keep up with everything, like it's always in motion. You're never getting to the place where you stop.
Yeah. And tell me how mindset shifts help support that, because I think that's an important point.
Yeah, the idea is kind of like change your mindset to adapt to the current situation, and then that will spark new behaviors and new responses for you. So if you're thinking like, oh, this is like what happened in, 1992, and you try to apply something that worked for you previously, the chances of that being successful now is slim. So instead of thinking, what have I done before? It's really a focus in, well, how do I need to think about this situation now? And then once that gets clear, then the behaviors start to be, oh, if I'm thinking of it this way, then here's some actions I can take. And that's the value of having a sounding board, to help you think through how to think about a current situation that you're facing. That's actually the hardest part. Like there's that old line about like, I had to get my mind right. Like that really is true. It's the thinking that prompts everything else. So getting your thinking right about a certain circumstance is going to help you respond successfully to it.
Yeah, and I think that's something that sometimes is a concept that is hard to understand, but once you've experienced it, you do see how you could be in the same situation, but have a completely different perspective, different actions that you're taking, and even how you feel emotionally about something. Do you feel
Yes.
stressed, feel anxious, or do you see it as an opportunity? And to me, those are the qualities, if you break them down, of what it means to be adaptable, resilient, or dynamic. But sometimes the concept feels hard for people to understand because it feels fuzzy, doesn't it?
It feels fuzzy, and that emotional part of it's really powerful, right? If you think it's a disaster, guess what? You tend to make it a disaster. If you think it's an opportunity, you're just going to look at the whole circumstances differently, and you're going to take different actions as a result.
Do you have any real life stories or examples you could share of, how some of the leaders that you worked with shifted their mindsets, and then how that actually led to different outcomes or actions or results as a result of that?
Mhm. I use a story in the book that's actually one of my favorite ones. And it was a coaching client. And every time we got to a point of him thinking a little bit differently or doing something different, he would say this one phrase. He would always say, oh, I'm going to have to pay the piper. I'm going to have to pay the piper. And that one phrase was like stopping him from moving forward. It was a verbal example of how he was thinking in his head, which is, this is going to cost me too much in some way or other. And what was really interesting, when I pointed it out to him, he was like, what do you mean? I don't say that. And then I just identified every time he said it to me. And he was like, what? And then I had him try to not say that for a week. And he came back the next week and he was like, oh my gosh, that I could not say it. He said, now that I heard myself saying it, I could not say it. And so we had to practice a couple weeks for him to not say that and try to help him to say something else to himself in his head. And the impact was profound, though, because once he stopped kind of creating that mental barrier for himself, everything now became an opportunity or a possibility. He just removed that thinking, that mindset that was stopping him literally from everything. And he had been stuck for a while. Yeah, so that's like a verbal example of a mindset that might be there that we might not even notice.
Yeah. And also just a great example. When I read that, I also found that story really profound, because for me, what it highlighted was how simple things that we say or the language that we use is often reinforcing a mindset, sometimes which is not conscious, right? In his mind, he
Right.
didn't even realize he was saying that.
No.
But there's a mindset that was driving that was actually influencing the behaviors and actions that he was taking.
Yeah, that's right. And that's what's so helpful about a coach. They can notice not only your thinking patterns, but your verbal patterns. And they don't really change it for you. What they do is just point it out. They're able to tell you things that you can't see for yourself.
That's right. Hence sounding board, right?
Yeah, hence sounding board.
Well, let's dive deeper in one area, because there's one important theme you have in the book, and it really is this idea that there is not one way to be a leader. And certainly that resonated with myself a lot when I was a coaching client of yours. Also, because I also felt that my own style as a leader didn't fit this sort of masculine, authoritative style of leadership development that I had grown up thinking was the way that you would lead in a business setting. So can you talk more about that and how the development can help somebody come into their own and bring more authenticity and thus actually more impact into the way that they lead?
Ah, for sure. That's actually really the premise of the book, which is so much current leader developments based in models and theories and assessments and tools from the last century. And those were all developed in the 70s, 80s, 90s, when the majority of leaders were white males. So I always talk about how the first 10 years of my coaching career, I only coached white males. Why was that? Not because I wanted to only coach white males. That's the only people that were in the senior leadership roles. So those models all are based on that kind of a thinking that there's one way to be a leader, and it's the white male way. Now things are so much more diverse and complex. It's time to shift that thinking and have something that's more individual and diversified for the person. And the reason I think that is I've seen maybe, I don't know how many, a lot of CEOs, and I've even seen CEOs in the same industry, in the same style company, stage company, and the leaders operate totally differently, right? And both of those companies are successful. So if there was one way to be a leader, we would know what it was and every company would be successful, but it doesn't work like that. And I have another story in the book about how even this guy was actually a white male, but at the time leadership philosophy came out that you have to be charismatic. And he was not a charismatic leader. He was had been an engineer, and he was like a detail, metrics driven, linear thinker. And he started trying to be charismatic because he thought, oh gosh, this is what I have to do. And it's actually how I got to him, because everyone was like, what happened to this guy? They literally thought he was like drinking or something, because he suddenly started, operating in a way that was so different than his natural personality. And so HR was like, whoa, he needs help, right? So they call me in, and then I found out, oh, he's trying to be, quote, charismatic, whatever that means, right? And I just helped him find his own natural style of leadership, which wasn't the stereotypical charismatic style, but worked perfectly well for his organization. And he went on to be very successful as a CEO, and was relieved. He was so relieved he didn't have to be charismatic, because that was taking a lot of energy and time and concentration to do that. And under stress, of course, it was even harder to maintain that. So being able to dial it back to his more natural style actually helped him be more successful. Now he could focus on the pieces of the business and his approach to it in a way that worked for him.
Well, and I think it's important because we hear now a lot about this idea of authenticity as a leader, right? And that employees, people want to engage with someone that they view as being authentic. And what you're talking about is this idea of sort of letting your natural tendencies or your natural inclinations through, which to me would ideally make you more authentic, right? Because you're operating in a way that feels more natural to yourself.
Yes. And so that authenticity can guide how you operate as a leader. Just a little caveat, sometimes I think people misinterpret authenticity, meaning I can say whatever I want to, whenever I want to. And that's not really true. It's really authentic in your role as a leader. So you're not going to just be, full kimono open or something, but you are going to try to bring yourself to the role, because who do people want to follow? They want to follow a real person, someone that they feel connected to, someone that they trust. And if you feel like the person's not being authentic, your trust of them is very low. So that it's like blending your own natural style and approach and personality and, thinking, goals, ambition with your role as a leader. And that's like the little secret sauce.
I think that's an important point. And you talk about that in the book as well, right? That authenticity doesn't mean just spewing your mouth and, not having a filter. That, there's a recognition, I think, that we are in a workplace and that there needs to be this blend of both yourself as well as the organization's needs, as well as being and knowing that you're operating in a professional context. And I think a lot of that same thinking and philosophy is also what drives us at Sounding Board, right? This idea of needing to blend the individual leader's development with that of the broader organization's needs. And so tell me a little bit more about what advice you might give then to other leaders that are trying to figure out how they balance that, right? Because sometimes that is the challenge for you and I. We run our company the way that we would want the company to run based on our own leadership philosophies.
Right.
For most other leaders, they're operating in an organization where the values, the culture may have been there from before. And if they're new to an organization, they're also trying to figure out how they adapt to that and bring their own style. So do you have any advice for leaders trying to do that?
I actually think just identifying to those two things is the start. So what is the leadership style of the organization you're operating in? What are the values? What are the behaviors? And interesting, a lot of times those are unstated. So you're going to have to use your observational skills to really look around and see, what are the patterns there of successful leaders in that organization. And then you also have to know, what's your natural style? What's your value set? What's your own idea of what a leader is and how to be successful as a leader? And you're going to kind of look for overlapping sets. So not everything, you're really super lucky, right? If everything matches, or you're like us, we can create the company that we want that matches us. But even you, Christine, and I, we had to find overlapping sets where we blend because we're not the same either. So it's trying to find that place where your natural way of operating blends with the values and operating structure of the organization. And not everything's going to match. So you're not looking for 100%. but you're looking for enough of a match where there's a fit for the organization and there's a fit for you personally. Like the days are gone where you have to give up yourself and just operate the way the organization tells you. That's just no longer successful. People just won't follow you if you operate that way.
Yeah, and I do think that that is something that has changed quite a bit since you started coaching 25 years ago to today. I won't
Yeah.
say that we've reached nirvana. Certainly, I think that's going to be an ongoing journey. But I think given just how much has happened in the last few years, now multi-generations of leaders we have in the workforce, a lot of the broader shifts, whether it's around DEI and a focus on even well-being and bringing yourself into work, it does feel like now is the time for folks to really think about how they can be a more dynamic leader. What do you think, Lori?
Well, 100%. And I think one of the big changes has been how long leader development took in the past. It took 20 years, right? I just saw the article today about the CEO of Chevron. He can't retire because there's nobody to take his place because they haven't been able to develop the next level of leaders yet. So the times have changed. We have to do that much more rapidly than we did in the past, and take into account the constantly changing context. So it really is complex, and it requires a completely different approach than we've taken in the past.
Right. Well, certainly, I think that is all to say why we need your book, probably more than ever. Because so many of these things are things that not only the executives at companies are grappling with, but as we've seen, Lori, all the way down to first-time managers. Given the rapid pace of change, there's just so much being thrown at leaders and managers today. I do think a lot of the concepts in the book will be helpful for every single level of leader.
Yeah, and I really think even for people who are kind of pre-leaders, they're trying to figure out how to get on the leadership track. It's hard to even know where that track is right now.
Right. And sometimes you have to make your own track. Oftentimes that track cuts across multiple companies, multiple organizations, different cultures, values. So certainly we know and have seen how much leaders are facing. Okay, well, last couple of minutes, Lori, I'm just going to ask you one more question, which is, for folks that, get the opportunity, one, we want to encourage all of you. Her book, Leadership Revolution, Future of Developing Dynamic Leaders, is out now on pre-sales. It's going to be launched in October, but certainly you can pre-order your book now. What do you hope people take away from this book that I know you've spent a lot of time working on? We've seen it firsthand how much of your heart and soul and the 25 years of experience you've put into this. What do you really hope people take away from it?
Really a couple of things. I think one is, there's a process for developing yourself as a leader, and anyone can do it. Right. Secondly, that coaching is an invaluable tool for developing yourself as a leader. That's the person that can see the thing that you can't see yourself. It's the person that can challenge you beyond what you think you're capable of. It's the one that can see the big leap you need to take to really step fully into the power of your leadership. So just the value of that process of coaching, whether that's a peer coach, professional coach, a mentor, whoever that is, it takes that outside party to help you make the leap. It's not something you can do by yourself. And I think the last is just all the different concepts in the book that people can use for their own benefit. Not everything's going to fit for every person, but there's lots of ideas in there that you can take and, customize for yourself to help your own leadership development.
Well, I'm super excited for folks to get a little peek into what I experienced working with you as a coach. And just want to thank you again for coming on the show and sharing a bit about the book.
Great. Thanks for having me, Christine. So fun.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Have a great week. And don't forget to order the book today.